I found out what my cousin had been saying about me at my own aunt's birthday dinner. Not because someone sat me down and told me. Because I walked into the kitchen to help with the serving and overheard the tail end of a conversation between two relatives I had always trusted. One of them was saying, "Well, that's what Nkechi told us. She said Amara took the money from the family account and never paid it back. Said she's been doing it for years." The other said, "That explains the new car." They did not see me in the doorway. I stood there long enough to be certain of what I had heard. Then I went back to the dining room. I sat down at the table, picked up my fork, ate the rest of my meal. I did not confront anyone that night. But I was shaking. Not from fear. From the specific, precise anger of someone who has understood that a false and damaging story has been circulating about them, and that most of the people at the table already believe it. My name is Amara. I am 30 years old. I have never stolen a cent from anyone in my life. And my cousin Nkechi had been telling our entire family that I had. This is the story of how I found out what I discovered and what I did about it. Nkechi and I had always had a complicated relationship. Not hostile. Not openly difficult. Complicated in the way that relationships between cousins who grow up in the same extended family can be complicated. Close enough to know each other well, including the difficult parts. We were 3 years apart. She was older. For most of our childhood that had been significant. She was the one who organized games, who decided who was in and who was not, who narrated the version of family events that everyone accepted. I had always been the quieter one. The one who watched more than she performed. The one who did not argue when Nkechi's version of events was slightly different from mine, because arguing had never felt worth the cost. As adults we maintained the surface of a functional relationship. Family gatherings. Birthday messages. We did not spend time together outside of family obligations, and neither of us pretended otherwise. I had always sensed, without being able to fully articulate it, that something in Nkechi did not want me to do well. Not enough to actively work against me. Or so I had believed. The kitchen doorway had corrected that belief precisely. She had not simply not wanted me to do well. She had been actively constructing a story about why I hadn't. I need to explain the family account so the lie makes sense. 3 years before the birthday dinner my grandmother passed away. She left behind an inheritance divided among her adult children and some older grandchildren. Part of it was held in a shared family account used for family occasions. Funerals, weddings, celebrations that required pooled funds. I had been asked by my uncle, my grandmother's eldest son, to manage the account. Not because I was the closest family member. Because I was the most organized and the only one who worked in finance professionally. I managed it carefully and transparently. Every transaction had a record. Every use of the funds had been agreed beforehand, confirmed by message, and documented in a shared spreadsheet that several family members could access. In the 3rd year, a family member needed emergency funds for a medical bill that could not wait. The family agreed via group message to use a portion of the account. I processed the transfer. That was the transaction Nkechi had chosen to describe as theft. She had taken a documented, agreed, transparent emergency transfer and told people I had taken the money for myself. And she had been telling it for months before I heard it in the kitchen doorway. I drove home from the birthday dinner and sat at my kitchen table and thought for a long time. My friend Obioma had texted during dinner to ask how the event was going. I had replied, "I'll call you tomorrow." I did not call her that night. I needed the first processing to be quiet. I thought about what I knew and what I did not know. What I knew. Nkechi had told at least 2 family members that I had taken money from the family account. The 2 relatives I had overheard believed the story. The new car comment suggested the story had been connected to a second-hand car I had bought with my own salary 3 months earlier. What I did not know. How long the story had been circulating, who else had heard it, whether it had reached the people who mattered most in our family, and what was behind Nkechi's motivation beyond the general discomfort with my doing well that I had always sensed in her. I opened my laptop and logged into the family account management portal. Every transaction was there. Clean, documented, dated, explained. I exported the full records to a PDF and saved it. Then I went to bed. I did not sleep immediately, but I eventually slept. Tomorrow I would start building the picture. I called Obioma the next morning. She listened to the whole story without interrupting. When I finished, she asked 2 questions. The first was, "Do you know for certain it's Nkechi?" Said yes. I had heard my name and Nkechi's name together in a context that was not ambiguous. The second question was, "What do you want the outcome to be?" I sat with that for a moment. I said, "I want the truth to exist somewhere accessible. I don't want to spend the rest of my life at family events knowing people are looking at me through a lie." She was quiet. "Then you need to make the truth easy to see," she said. "Not dramatically. In a practical, undeniable way." I asked what she meant. She said, "You have the records. The question is when and how you make them visible. Not in a way that starts a war. In a way that ends one you didn't know you were in." I wrote that down. Ends one you didn't know you were in. That was the frame I needed. I thanked her and got off the call and began working through what the practical, undeniable version of the truth actually looked like. I had a spreadsheet. I had message records. I had 3 years of documentation. The foundation was already there. I spent the week after the birthday dinner gathering information. Not confronting Nkechi. Not asking family members what they had heard. Listening carefully from the edge of the room, the way I had always done. I had coffee with my Aunt Celestine, my mother's sister, on a Wednesday. She had access to the family account records. I talked about the account in general terms. Asked how she felt the management had been going, whether she had any questions. She said the account seemed fine to her. But at the end of the conversation she said something carefully. "I did hear something recently that concerned me. I wasn't sure whether to bring it up." I asked her to tell me. She said Nkechi had mentioned to her, at a different gathering about a month earlier, that there were unexplained transactions in the account and she was not sure where the money had gone. Celestine said she had not known what to do with this because she did not want to accuse me without evidence. She had been waiting to see whether anything else came up. Thanked her. I told her I would get her the full account records by the end of the week. She looked relieved. The story was wider than I had thought. And the month earlier timing confirmed it had been deliberate and sustained. I mapped what I knew. By the end of the first week, I had a clearer picture of how far the story had spread. Celestine had heard it. The 2 relatives from the kitchen doorway had heard it. A family friend named Bayo, who had attended most extended family events, had apparently also heard something, because he had been unusually quiet toward me at the birthday dinner in a way I had not registered at the time but understood now. This was not the entire family. But it was enough. In a family that communicated primarily through gatherings and phone calls, a story circulating among 4 or 5 influential people spread further than its original boundaries. I also began to think carefully about why. Nkechi had started telling this story approximately 3 to 4 months earlier, based on the timeline I could piece together. 3 to 4 months ago was when I had bought the car. It was also when I had been promoted at work, not dramatically, but visibly enough that it had come up at a family gathering. She had seen me moving forward. She had found a way to attach a question mark to it. This was not a confused retelling of something she had misunderstood. This was deliberate. I went back through all the messages. Every family group message from the previous 3 years that related to the account. Every conversation where use of the funds had been discussed and agreed. Every screenshot I had of collective decisions made before I had acted on them. The emergency transfer specifically had been discussed in the main family group. My uncle had written, "Can we use family funds for this? Amara, please advise." I had replied with the amount available and asked for agreement before proceeding. 5 family members had replied in agreement, including my uncle, including Nkechi. Nkechi had been in that conversation. She had seen the agreement. She had not responded with a yes or a no. Not everyone replied to every message, but she had been present for it. She had watched the agreement happen and had later chosen to describe the outcome as theft. I looked at her message history in the group for a long time. She was active. She read things. She knew the context. This was not a case of someone passing on a misunderstanding. I copied every relevant message to a document. I organized it chronologically. I added the account records alongside it so the message history and transaction record matched exactly. Then I thought about what to do with it. I did not want to cause a scene. That needs to be said clearly because everything that followed could be read as a scene if described without context. What I wanted was accuracy, not drama, not humiliation, not a confrontation that split the family. I wanted the people who had been told a lie to have access to the truth in a form they could not dispute. I also wanted Nkechi to understand that I knew what she had done, not so she would feel punished. So she would understand that what she had been doing had been seen. I decided to do it at the next family gathering coming up in 2 weeks, my uncle's birthday lunch. Most of the relevant people would be in the same room. Not a scene. Not a speech. Something like what Obioma had described, making the truth easy to see. I told Obioma my plan. She listened, asked a few careful questions, then said, "That's clean. That's the right way." I told my mother. She was quiet for a moment, then said, "Are you certain?" I said I was certain about the facts. The decision about what to do with them was harder. She said, "Then trust your certainty about the facts and move carefully with everything else." I thought about that for the rest of the week. I called my uncle Tobias on the Friday before the lunch. He was the eldest family member and the person who had originally asked me to manage the account. He deserved to hear this from me directly rather than discover it at his own birthday lunch. I told him I had heard that a story was circulating about the family account suggesting I had misused the funds. I wanted to share the full documentation before the weekend so he had the complete picture. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I had wondered. I heard something last month that didn't add up, but I didn't want to bring it up without talking to you first." I asked what he had heard. He described essentially the same version I had heard in the kitchen doorway. Missing context. Missing the group message. Missing the agreement. I asked if I could share the documents with him that evening. He said yes. I sent everything. The account records, the message history, the emergency transfer agreement with all the family replies including the original request from him. The full picture, organized so any person reading it could follow the timeline without any explanatory text from me. He called me back 40 minutes later. He said, "I see it all. I'm sorry this happened to you." I said, "I'll see you Sunday." The lunch was at my Aunt Blessing's house. She had a large kitchen and an even larger dining room, and the family had been gathering there for major events for as long as I could remember. I arrived early, which was unusual for me. I helped set up. I talked to relatives. I was present and normal and did not telegraph anything by being tense or quiet. Nkechi arrived about 20 minutes after I did. We said hello. We hugged the way we always hugged. She asked about my work. I asked about hers. We had a 3-minute conversation that was entirely normal on the surface and entirely not normal underneath, at least for me. She had no idea I knew. I had thought about whether to tell her privately before the lunch. I had gone back and forth several times. In the end I had decided not to, for a specific reason. Not to ambush her. Because anything said privately between us would remain private, and the lie had not been told privately. It had been told to a room. The correction needed to be available to the same room. Not performed. Available. I had a USB drive in my bag with the full documentation. I had also sent the same file to 3 family members the previous evening, my uncle Tobias, my aunt Celestine, and one other, asking them to have it ready on their phones. The lunch went normally for the first 2 hours. Food was served. Conversation moved around the table. My uncle was in good spirits. He was turning 65 and the family had come out properly. Then, during the period after eating when people were on second cups of tea and the conversation was general and relaxed, my uncle Tobias stood up. He said he wanted to say something before the afternoon continued. He said he had been thinking about it for a few days and felt the family needed to hear it. People quieted. He said that he had been told recently that there were concerns about the management of the family account. That he wanted to address this openly because in his experience, things said quietly in corners caused more damage than the truth said clearly in a room. He looked at me. Not accusingly. Signaling. I nodded once. He said, Amara manages the family account. She has always managed it transparently. I received the full records and message history earlier this week. I would like everyone to understand what those records show. He looked at his phone and began reading from the document I had sent him. He read the original request for the emergency transfer. He read the family agreement. He read the transaction record and date. Simply, clearly, without editorializing. When he finished, the room was quiet. My uncle looked around the room. He said, I want to ask in front of everyone whether anyone has a question about what I have just read. Nobody spoke. He said, I also want to say that it has come to my attention that a version of these events has been shared within the family that did not include the context I just described. I am not going to say more about how that happened. But I want it to be clear to everyone present that the account has been managed correctly, documented fully, and that any suggestion otherwise is not accurate. He sat down. The room stayed quiet for another moment. Not the uncomfortable silence of people who do not know what to say. The processing silence of people reorganizing information they had been holding in one form and receiving it now in another. I looked at Nkechi. She was looking at the table. Her face was not easy to read. Not guilt exactly. Something closer to the expression of a person who has been prepared for a version of events and found that version has not arrived. A recalibration happening in real time. I did not say anything to her in that moment. Not because I had nothing to say. Because my uncle had already said the important thing and adding to it would have made it about something other than the truth. Picked up my tea. I let the room continue. And the new car comment, I said. Someone connected a car I bought with my own salary to a transaction from the family account. She was quiet. I said, I need you to understand what you actually did. Specifically, you took something true and removed the parts that made it true. That is not a misunderstanding. That is a choice. She said, I understand that. Good, I said. That is what I needed you to say. The conversation lasted 50 minutes. I want to be clear about what it was and what it was not. It was not a reconciliation. We did not end the call as friends. We did not reach a place where both of us felt warm about the other. What it was honest. Perhaps the most honest conversation Nkechi and I had ever had, which was something in itself given that honesty had not been a quality I would have associated with our relationship before. She said she had been carrying a resentment about me for years that she had never examined. That it had started when we were young. Something about the way I had been seen by our grandmother. The way I moved through the world quietly but ended up in places she had expected to arrive first. I told her I had always sensed that resentment without fully understanding it. She said she was sorry. Not going through a required motion. Arriving, after a long and uncomfortable route, at something genuine. I said I accepted that. I meant it as a true statement, not a promise of a specific outcome. I said I did not know what our relationship would look like going forward. That I was not angry, but I was not going to pretend the previous months had not happened. She said she understood. We said goodbye and ended the call. I sat at my table for a while after. Obioma came over that Friday. She brought wine and the particular energy she always brought when something had been resolved but not necessarily ended. A kind of generous, attentive presence that recognized the complexity of the outcome. I told her about the phone call with Nkechi. She listened to all of it. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment. She told you she knew what she was doing, she said. Yes. That's not nothing. A lot of people in that position never get there. Thought about that. No, I said. I suppose they don't. She asked how I felt about the family now. Whether the dynamics had shifted permanently or would return to normal. I said I was not sure normal was quite the right destination. Normal had included a version of me that did not know what was being said in kitchens. Normal had included a relationship with Nkechi that had been functional on the surface while something unexamined sat underneath. Maybe something better than normal, I said. What does that look like? She asked. More accurate, I said. People seeing what is actually there rather than what a story told them was there. Obioma raised her glass. To accuracy, she said. I raised mine. We drank. My Aunt Celestine called me 2 weeks after the lunch. She was calling about the family account going forward, whether I was comfortable continuing to manage it or whether the recent events had made that feel untenable. I told her I was comfortable continuing, that the records were clean and my management had been transparent throughout, that if anything, the recent events had demonstrated why the documentation practice I had maintained was valuable. She agreed. Then she said something I had not expected. She said she wanted to apologize. Not for anything she had done directly. For the fact that she had heard the story and had not come to me immediately. That she had held it privately while she waited for more information. And that holding it had allowed the story to sit in the family longer than it should have. I told her I understood. That the instinct to gather more information before acting was not wrong in principle. She said, "But I knew you. I should have trusted what I knew." I thought about that for a while after the call. Knowing a person and trusting what you know about them was a different thing from believing the story someone else told about them. Not everyone made that distinction. She had started to. That was something. 3 months after the birthday dinner, the family felt different. Not completely. Families are slow-moving things. Not everyone had a moment of revelation. Some people simply adjusted quietly. The way people adjust when new information replaces old information without anyone needing to announce the update. But there were visible things. My uncle Tobias had begun copying me on a broader set of family communications, not just the account-related ones. A small signal of restored trust that I noticed and valued. Celestine had become more directly warm toward me at family events, in the way of someone who has recalibrated and shows it through behavior rather than words. Bayo, the family friend who had been unusually quiet at the birthday dinner, had pulled me aside at a subsequent gathering to say he was glad to have seen the records, that he had felt something was off and was relieved to have the clarity. And Kechi was at the next family event, and we occupied the same room without hostility. We did not have a warm conversation. We had a normal one, about ordinary things. With the quality of two people who have said something true to each other and are now figuring out how to move forward. It was not the relationship we had had before. It was smaller and more honest. I found that I preferred it. I want to say something about what it cost. Stories like this are sometimes told as if the truth is a weapon you pick up and deploy and then everything improves. It is not quite like that. The 3 months between the kitchen doorway and the lunch had cost something. Not irreversible things. Not things I would choose differently, but real cost. I had spent those months moving through family events knowing the story existed and that people were looking at me through it, without being able to do anything about it yet. That required a kind of patience I did not find easy. I had also spent them in a specific loneliness that comes from being misrepresented in a community you love. The family was important to me. The opinion of the older relatives mattered to me. Knowing their opinion had been shaped by something false, and that I could not simply state the truth without evidence to show alongside it, was a particular kind of difficult. I had also had to manage the anger, not suppress it, hold it in a form that was useful rather than reactive. There had been evenings when I had sat at my table and felt a precise fury about what had been done and had needed to decide again, not to let that fury drive the next action. The fury had been a signal, not a strategy. Getting the distinction right had taken real effort. I was glad I had managed it. I called Nkechi once more about 2 months after our first call. Not because there was a specific unresolved thing. More because I had been thinking about what she had said about resentment and wanted to say something I had not said during the first call. She answered. She sounded surprised. Not unpleasantly. I told her I had been thinking about what she had described. The resentment. The sense that things were going the right way for me in a way that felt unfair. I told her I understood that feeling. Not as an excuse for what she had done, but as something I had experienced myself. The specific difficulty of watching someone else move forward when you feel stuck. That feeling was real. And it was also not a reason to damage someone. She said she knew that. I said. I am telling you because I want you to know I do not think you are a bad person. I think you made a bad choice because you were carrying something you had not examined. And now you have examined it. What you do with that is yours. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, Why are you being this way about it? I asked what she meant. She said, Generous. I didn't expect it. I said, I'm not being generous. I'm being accurate. Those things aren't the same. She said she was still thinking about the distinction. I thought that was the most honest thing she had ever said to me. The family account still needed to be managed. I mention this because it would be easy to tell this story in a way that skips over the ordinary continuing work that had to go on while everything else was happening. Life does not pause for its dramatic moments. The account had transactions that needed processing and records that needed updating and a quarterly summary that I sent to the family regardless of anything else. I continued managing it with the same transparency I had always applied. With, if anything, a slightly more detailed communication practice. Not because I was proving something, but because the events had confirmed what I had always believed. Clear documentation protected everyone, including me. My uncle thanked me for the next quarterly summary more specifically than usual. He said it was well done. His wife had added a note saying the summary was clearer than anything she had seen from a family account manager. Small things. But small things accumulated into a picture. The picture, after 3 months, was of an account that was well managed and a person who managed it carefully and whose management had been tested and had held. I did not need external validation to feel confident about my own conduct. But I will not pretend the validation did not feel good. Felt good. The truth, made visible and undeniable, had landed exactly where it needed to land. Obioma asked me once, toward the end of all of this, what I had learned. Thought she meant practically. About evidence or documentation or managing family dynamics. I started to answer in those terms. She shook her head. Not the strategy. What did you learn about yourself? I sat with that. I said, I learned that I had been absorbing things for a long time without naming them. What things? The way Nkechi looked at me sometimes. The way I had always felt something off without being able to say what. I had filed it away as unimportant. Because naming it would have required acting on it, and acting on it was harder than ignoring it. Bioma nodded. And now, she said. Now I think ignoring something you can clearly sense is a kind of dishonesty to yourself. Not in a dramatic way. In a daily way. I let something exist in my life that I knew was not quite right because not naming it felt easier. She said, Most people do that. Yes, I said. But most people also spend their time surprised by things they could have seen coming. She was quiet for a moment. You weren't surprised, she said. No, I said. Just unprepared for how far it had gone. She said that was the part you could not always account for in advance. I said I thought that was right. It has been 8 months since the birthday dinner and the kitchen doorway and the overheard sentence that changed what I knew about my family. The account is still managed cleanly. The documentation is still thorough. I have become more deliberate about transparency in all professional contexts. Not from fear but from having seen clearly what transparency could do when it was needed. Kechi and I are not close. We are in the same family and always will be, and we behave toward each other accordingly. There is no hostility. There is a caution on both sides that is probably healthy given what happened. We are 2 people who know something true about each other now that we did not know before. And that knowledge changes the air in a room in ways that do not fully disappear. I do not wish her harm. I also do not spend time on her. The people who matter in my family see me more clearly than they did before the birthday dinner. That is worth what it cost. Not every truth is easy to establish. Some truths require patience and documentation, and the willingness to wait for the right moment rather than the most satisfying one. I had all of those things. Not because I am exceptional. Because I had spent years building habits, documenting, recording, being transparent. That turned out to be exactly the tools the situation required. My cousin spread lies about me. Then I showed everyone the truth. And the truth had been sitting in a spreadsheet for 3 years. Waiting.